We go. It's so great to be here today with Magnus Gautestad of the wonderful YouTube channel Beauty and the Faith. And Magnus has two big projects that he's working on, and I'm going to let him tell you about those. But they have to do with renewing the world. And but I heard Magnus's life story, and I just thought it was so fascinating. We usually start with the story here. So Magnus, I was wondering if you could tell us about kind of how you grew up and how you got to this place that you're at today, and maybe why the title of your channel is Beauty and the Faith.
Well, that will be my pleasure. Thank you very much for having me on here, Karen. It's a great privilege. Growing up, what I can really remember from my early days is that I had a great fear of death, and I can remember that I was very uncomfortable, even into my teens, to just be alone with myself. I grew up in a atheist home, quite a radical home, and there was no room for spiritual discussion, and I didn't really know who to go to with that. So over time, I guess I just kept on running from myself, running from this thought of the eternity, which just never stops, and it just never stops. And that thought just drove me mad, really. And so if you had seen me in my late teens, I would have Thai boxing equipment in one hand, and I would have my skateboard in the other, and I would have my guitar on my back, and I was planning to meet my girlfriend at 9. And most days was like that for me. I was very much wanting to do things all the time, and having such a restlessness led, of course, also to a lot of partying to deal with that. Over time, I got into drugs, and really, it really came to a crisis in the beginning of my 20s, where I started to feel that that life just seems very meaningless. So chasing women, chasing pleasure, chasing popularity, and all of these things, which I did in a very unconscious way. I remember it took me about 22 or 23 years old before I ever said, wow, there's something called the moment. And I remember it was almost like a pre-conversion to my spiritual path, that I looked around the room and I say, this is the first time I'm conscious and I can observe my thoughts properly. And I'm like, it was almost like an awakening. But that would happen a little bit later, because when I had that crisis of meaning, I remember I was sitting in one party, I was high, I was drunk, and I was just asking myself, is really this all there is to life? At that time, I had been, had a lot of quite of success, you could say, in different areas, but I just never found any peace of mind, I would say. And I could also see, of course, the friends around me, a very quite radical environment around me, how they gradually was deteriorating and being very lost, and many got to harder drugs. I kept it more on the light side. And that time I isolated myself from the world. I moved to a city, and for the first time in my life, I started to just face my fears. So I was in this room. In the day, I worked at this storage house, and I just started to listening to podcasts and audiobooks, and just tried to learn something, because throughout school, I was so hard for me to learn in school. I was like playing PlayStation under my desk, or I was sleeping, or it was just so hard for me to go through that. But really, I always loved exploring and learning, but it was just I never really found a path or a purpose in my life, or somebody who kind of said, here's a vision, or here's some principles. Everything was about, freedom, freedom, freedom. And there's such a kind of a slavery in that, actually. But now I'm here. I'm in Oslo, in a new city and capital of Norway, and I'm just trying to figure out things. And as that happening, all kinds of suppressed anger and everything comes up. And I remember sometimes when things come up, just hitting pillows and going all crazy in there. And after the few months, I probably had 100 Post-it notes over all the walls. My father saw a video, and he was both inspired and I guess a little frightened about what's happening with my son here. But I guess he was glad that something was happening. Had a kind of a bit of a strange messages, because he's an atheist, doctor in biology, scientist man, that divorced my mother when they were 2, and my mother is more the type of hardcore feminist teacher type of working for the government type personality. So it's quite a interesting different messages I got growing up, but but none of these paths really has any spiritual depths to it. So I thought, I'm gonna really achieve something. I'm gonna do something with my life. I had, been quite a good skateboarder, but really, other than that, I was I would say a relatively loser when it comes to really achieving something with my life. So now I started learning music, and I'm going to really achieve something here. And I actually worked very hard for a couple of years. I also went to San Francisco, and that is one of the beginnings of my life completely starting to change in a very, very transformative way. Because at that time, you just imagine me, long hair, tight jeans, kind of going to a community college in San Francisco, wanting to be a rock star or something like that. And then there was all of these courses there, and I go into a course called Musical Appreciation, which was called Listening to Western Music. And in there, through education and through training my ear and learning history of the West, it was like at that time I was listening to black metal basically, and or some rap, and going from that, and suddenly it was like, whoa, this is the most powerful, this is the power I've been seeking through the most hardcore of everything, right? And more, I remember I was able to take in more details and layer of music at the same time, because I was focusing on one thing at a time. And then really something started to change in me. I remember when I, after a few weeks of that course, when I walked into the streets, I started to look up, and I started to noticing some patterns around me of some of that beauty and order I seen in the music, also in the architecture. And then I saw I wanted to go and also see more of this, because that power was like, oh, that's like the missing key. Is this the missing piece that I've always been looking for? That power felt could finally take me out of that type of flattening of living in the world, which was felt like such a slavery, where wherever I go, I just ended up with the same meaningless type of kind of a whatever comes up comes down type of a thing. It wasn't I didn't have a sense of it was possible to step above that and grow beyond that. And so what happened, I practiced so much guitar that I got I hurt both my hands, so I couldn't play guitar anymore. I couldn't write on my exam and nothing, so I just had to drop out of school. And then I came back to Norway, and there, I couldn't play guitar anymore. And now my life seemed really meaningless, because I spent 3 years. This is the purpose of my life, is to become a great musician and everything. But still, I had that seed in me that really I was seeking more now, this beauty, than this type of rush of being successful through music, or being recognized, or just expressing myself, or something like that. And I was walking around in my, relatively modernistic Norwegian Scandinavian society, and was looking for those experiences. And I went into a classical concert hall, and I was almost sleeping. It was like, this was not what I was looking for. This was not what I have learned there. And where did I go? Well, that took me to the church. So because in church, I got that, now I stepped out of the world. Now this doesn't remind me of my old life, and drags me back there and helps me to put me in this type of a new identity. So I didn't want to be kind of that bad boy anymore. I didn't think it was cool anymore to be like so dominating and all of that. I wanted to be a gentleman. It changed how that my self-image and my values, my inner values. I wanted to kind of, because it's easy to just be like bad and kind of like this radical. That's just a natural way. But to have self-control and, try to talk in the other person's interest, and walk with style, and be pleasing in other people's sight, and achieve things that are difficult, that was kind of, oh, wow, that is much bigger challenge. Wow, that is a real man. So in combination with the classical tradition of beauty and virtue and all of these things, which took me out of and transcended my world, I also now started to see in the church, which gave me this stepping into another level of consciousness, another way of being. And when I was in there, I was just sitting listening to to Bach, and the word didn't give any sense to me. The Bible was just like, at that time I was doing transcendental meditation, and I was like living in the power of now by Eckhart Tolle, and I thought that everything Jesus said was just a way to really live in the kingdom, which was to live in the present moment. I couldn't comprehend the thing about faith, that there's actually something as faith, which it's beyond this just waking up to the present living and finding peace of mind. Because that was the thing. I had been doing these new age practices, you know, along with my overachieving obsession and Tony Robbins and all of that type of a stuff. And then, but I found peace, but I didn't find like the joy. And I must say, being in all kinds of communities around the world, you know, being with people who meditate, doing yoga, you know, being with rockers, skateboarders, you know, I've been like the guy that was one of the most popular at school, and everybody knew me, but I had nobody that really close to me. It was like that all through my growing up. So I've seen a lot of people, but there was something special about Christians. I remember many images of Christians where I saw in their eyes that there was a certain glow there that I especially saw in those who were Christian. It's kind of like this, you know, this life isn't that serious, you know, it kind of like this, just this unconditional joy that wasn't based on what was happening, but just and I remember I saw that in church, and I was like, over time, I first heard a message that was, the sin is yours. And for somebody with a very like anger problem and everything like that, no, it was never me, right? It was always other people. So it was like, I remember that week, after that preaching, like I didn't quite understand the Bible, but that message of, yes, when you're angry at somebody else, you know, they might do something which is bad or, you know, immoral, but at that moment, when you are like observing that and judging that and are being angry at that, then at the same time you're also sinning inside. So you first need to go in there and observe that and take responsibility of that, and then, you know, if it's still necessary, then you can help other people. You know, Jesus talking about this very famous parable. And I remember I started to feel more and more convicted that week that there was an ongoing kind of a destructiveness in me that wanted to kind of tear people down, that was leading me into destruction as well. And I got more and more convicted of that. So, and I think, I don't know how many Sundays it went, you know, I went there alone. There's not a single Christian in my family that I'm aware of, but I went there alone. And there was another message, was that God first calls you. It's like, it's not like you need to like, oh, just knock in and okay, save me out of this. It's kind of like, he first calls us, he meets us, like, and that in my mind, in the way I've been taught in the modern Norwegian world to think, that didn't make any sense, because now I was so convicted of how many I've hurt and how much I was hurting people regularly. And then at the same time, this God, like, I just got very touched that something like that was possible. And I remember sitting in the church there, and I got this overwhelming sense of love when I realized who God was. And I remember saying to myself, this is the first time where I really feel safe. And that was actually the first word for me. That was, I feel so safe now. It was almost like somebody was holding around me in a sense. It was like a personal safety of somebody watching out for you. And then my next thought was, this is real love. And, you know, we have so much talk today about what is love. Many think it's a feeling, but really it's a responsibility. But from that moment, something really started to change, because you can always act in a way and fake it till you make it with ideals and reach for ideals. But in my experience, there is something fundamental in you that needs to change your desires to truly be renewed as a person. And I don't know if I got saved that day or if that was because I had a lot of struggle after that, also going back and forth. And it was a long journey into many churches. I was a Freemason for 2 years. I was a Mormon for 18 months. I closed my whole music school that I created with 40 students in an old big bank building in Norway to go to Barcelona, where I went into a Hebrew roots movement for a year. And I didn't eat pork, and I kept the Shabbat, and I went to Israel and got baptized in the Jordan River. Maybe, as you understand, Karen, I like to do things 100%. And that's also where I met my wife. And she's a doctor from South America, from Ecuador, just a wonderful, aspiring woman. And she's, she was like a real serious Christian. And when I met her, that was the next level for me in really getting past this synergy of worldliness. Doesn't mean to go out of the world, but it really means to have spiritual discipline and to really be very careful about the heart and following the heart, because it's full of deception, and really try to live off more principles in life, and that was also just a wonderful, graceful blessing by the Lord. And we are now been married for 5 years, and we live in Spain. So a lot of things have happened, and I got so inspired also when I started reading the Bible more, that I am now at the last year on my bachelor in theology and leadership. And as part of that mission I really believe that there is a huge error that's been done in the Protestant evangelical tradition of neglecting so much of the potential of beauty. Because I think in a post-enlightenment society in the West, I think that so much of those Enlightenment thoughts have been crept in, even in many of the conservative fundamental churches, that we have been focusing so much on reason that we have reduced down really what we are to do if we look at the whole counsel of God and the whole character of God. So that is one thing that we need to think more holistically about this. But the other thing is that so often people start with apologetics. They kind of want to give you the truth bomb. They want that in your face type of repent and believe. And for some, I'm sure that is, it needs to click logically. But there wouldn't be I don't think the best apologetic in the world could have used logic on me and convinced me about the cross and all of those things. I would have found a creative way. I'm a very creative guy. I would have found a lot of creative way to keep on sinning. And even goodness. I remember I had a very, my nanny, when I was a child, sometimes we had like a nanny in the street, and she was a Christian. And I remember she was different from many others. And so, but her goodness, and I remember many Christians, being particularly sacrificial, but that goodness didn't put coal on my conscience and say, here is something, why I don't deserve this, and this led me. So for me, it really was beauty. It was beauty that led me to faith. So that is why I have this show called Beauty and the Faith, because I really want to explore. I bring Catholics on here. I bring secular conservatives. I bring philosophers, metaphysicians, Christians of Reformed tradition, of more modern traditions. I bring on a lot of people to really talk about, in general, just in terms of love. What would more beauty lead to? Would it lead to more environmental stewardship? Would it lead to more aspirations so that will help moral character? Could it lead to a more vital spiritual life if we have more beauty around us that keeps us more present, so we can more easily have our mind on Jesus, on God, so we can stay present and not go into the insanity of the flesh? So I want to explore this. And make it, but also an opening so people can explore these options. And I think that there are so many that especially artists, creatives, this group that we have not been able to reach many of these. And these are such important voices in society. The media and the artist has almost become icons in this time we're living in. So if there's anybody that can have a massive impact to bring people into spiritual joy and salvation, I think there will be, you know, the artist has a great potential right now to bring back wonder and help people to wonder about the deeper things of life. And then they can be convicted by the goodness of our actions. And then, you know, they might say, oh, I really hope that this is true. And then you can help them with opening the Bible and show very convincing evidence. So it is these art centers we're building online, and also,
well, okay,
you know,
let's hold off on your projects there for a second, because I want to explore a few of the ideas that you brought up while you were talking. Thought it was very interesting that it was a music appreciation class that began to kind of wake you up. And I've been a Christian for 40 years, I guess, a little over 40 years. But I started painting 25 years ago. Is that right? Yeah, about 25 years ago. And when I first started painting, I was just doing simple little watercolors. But then I started taking a class in creativity, and that really got me digging deeper into where do these principles of beauty come from, and how do you create something beautiful. But that also kind of led me into more of an appreciation of complexity. You know, you were before that, I always liked little village scenes and flower pots and things like that. But then I began to see that there can be a lot of deep beauty in very complex, painful things. And that changed my whole approach to music as well, because before that, I only liked simple little ditties. And then after that, all of a sudden, the world just opened up, not only to classical music, but to jazz and to some very kind of weird atonal disharmonious music, but I could see that in the midst of that complexity there were moments of beauty that kind of arose out of that. And so I thought it was just really interesting how you talked about how you got this music appreciation thing, and then you went out in the world and you started to see all the patterns, and it worked exactly the same way for me. But my inroad was through this study of the principles of beauty and creativity that opened up my life to all these patterns, both in music and out in the world. So,
yeah, it's very interesting when you have a change of kind of, some will call it preference, and sometimes I think true beauty is something that really transforms you. There is something called a subjective experience, but true beauty does something to you, and that is very powerful, and few can resist that. You have to really have a deep level of unconsciousness if you're not touched by true beauty.
mm-hmm. Well, and you were talking also about how you're hoping to reach artists who currently don't have a faith or don't even recognize that faith is possible. But one of the struggles that I see out there right now is like so many of the museums and galleries and opportunities where an artist might have an opportunity to exhibit their art are pulling artists towards ugliness and pulling them towards political propagandizing through their art, and are pulling them into this arena where whatever, if you can make the weirdest thing or the thing that's never been done before, rather than drawing them towards classically beautiful art. So a lot of artists might start out with an intent to create something beautiful, but then in order to be, accepted, they have to move towards this edginess and this dark place. So it seems like the movement of art today is all towards this dark. Well, I mean, there are some classical schools starting up again, but so have you run into that?
Yes, for sure. I actually just last summer I was back in Norway visiting my mother, and she took me to a modern art gallery, And after about 1 hour, I was so disgusted that I asked if we could leave. And then I just thanked her and say, thank you. Now I love the world a little bit less, so it's easier to love God. And then, but that was really hard. It was stones on the floor saying like capitalist pig, and there was like movies of people like saying whoa, and it was like this, and it was just so depressing and so extremely dark. And I can go. I was in Barcelona recently at the National Museum there, and you're seeing, martyrs being tortured to death. But it gives me bad news, but it doesn't leave me there. And that, I think, is one of the big differences when you don't have art that reflects timelessness. That is, it gives you bad news, and then it doesn't give you hope. And so, even the cross is horrible. Thinking about Jesus being on the cross and being tortured and humiliated like that is just one of the most horrible scenes you can imagine. But still, it can be greatly inspiring seeing great art like that. And that is what also beauty can do. A sad song, you can cry, and at the same time you're full with joy as the tears run down your face. And that is a dimension that modernism, I believe, has rejected. And then in a very almost like in a desperate attempt to grab you, they need to go to the aesthetics of pain and terror instead of the aesthetics of pleasure. And so I think that that's what's happening both in architecture, in the arts, in music, is that you can go to the other side and still create intellectual and emotional art that captivates you. But without the spiritual dimension, it's very easy that it just becomes prettiness when you make beauty. It becomes very superficial. And I think many have, it becomes cliche. It's become almost like, it becomes almost just like a fantasy world that you cannot really relate to. Right. So there's a room for ugliness as well in great piece of music. There needs to be contrast. There needs to be conflict. We need, why is there evil in the world? Well, it's because then we can know what is good, right? There needs to be both of these dynamics. But the classical tradition, here we have wisdom from several thousands of years, which has shown us how we can balance these points to elevate and to really transcend reality. And human nature hasn't changed since the old philosophers or since the early Christians. We're still dealing with the same nature, and it's just in different shapes and forms. And I think now it's really time to have a revival of these classical values. And it's also time for Christians to understand that if we are serving a timeless God, that you want to take people out of the time and the drifting and being lost in the world, if we then can use some of these elements that creates that sense of timelessness and above the world type of thinking, then we have a great deal to learn from each other. The classical environment have a lot to learn from Christian and spirituality, and then also the church has a lot to learn from those who are making beauty and have very deep transformative experiences with that. And I think that's something that we have quite lost. And I think many people are recognizing that these days there are movements all over the world in all forms of society that are shouting out for more beauty. They are very hungry for it.
So one of the other things you talked about that I thought was really interesting was you're kind of traversing through so many different spiritual trajectories, trying to find the place where you could find home in your church.
Yeah.
And you did a little of this, a little of that, a little of this other thing. Has that been part of your kind of pre-Christ personality, that you would just dive into something wholeheartly and then change course like a year later and dive into something else wholeheartedly? Well, I'll tell you what, one of the reasons I'm asking is I was trying to do a little research on you so I would know how to introduce you properly. And I ran into an old YouTube video that you had done reviewing a guitar teaching course. you had taken some sort of online guitar course early on, and so there's you doing this little review, and you've got long hair. You're the you're the
Thank
guy,
you.
and so you really jumped into guitar. You went whole hog in that, and are there other things in your life that you went into that way, or was that mostly just this whole spiritual trajectory?
That pilgrim type of personality is it's a trait I had all my life, and also even yeah, really up until being born again, this has been one of my strategies in life, is that it's better to leave a difficult situation than trying to change it. So that's kind of been my, if it was starting, I either got bored of something or I I had problems with any people, I just move on to the next thing. It was like that type of a thing. But it was also and this is something that's been a trait in my family, is that you have this sense, okay, you start a new job, and then you learn how to do everything, and then as soon as you learn everything and it becomes a routine for 1 week, then looking for the next thing. So I have that in me, and that's why I've been an entrepreneur, as my main income for the last 10 years. And I love to just start new things and create new things. So I'm a creator, and that's what I like to do. Of course, now that I'm married, and I start to appreciate and learn more about being centered, and so I think it's a mix of having a bit of unhappy times in the childhood and being lost, and just that was just my way of managing, and to not dealing with myself or dealing with other people. I didn't know how to quite deal with my emotions and all of that, and then it was just easier to just move on to the next thing and just have a lot of fresh starts. But when it comes to spirituality, that was really a hunger to find a true peace of mind, and also something that I really believed was true. So it took me, for me, it took me to come to the south of Spain into a small international Baptist church. And then for the first time, the leader said, "Don't trust me, trust this." And he pointed to a Bible. And because before that, it was always, we are the leaders and this is how we do things. But for the first time, it was really, everything was going around the type of a document, something objective that everybody was striving toward. So that really grounded me, and took my spirituality of dedication to a completely new level when I came to that. And since that, I've been pretty grounded, but I'm still a guy looking for the next thing. I don't know if I can completely be redeemed of that, and that might be also a strength, but
well, I was thinking about that, how when you brought up this idea of being the kind of personality that always jumps ship when things get difficult, but that you tied that to being an entrepreneur. So it's almost like they're two sides of the same piece of paper. So the one side is a deficit that needs some work, and the other side is, this is where the strength comes in being able to change course when needed, and look for new opportunities. And so as an entrepreneur, is there a particular thing that you've done that you've really enjoyed?
Yes. Very early on, I made drawings about things I wanted to start when I got big. I drew restaurants, I drew businesses, and my father, he was a kind of an entrepreneur on the side of being he likes to study, like do research, but all the government funding was for like global warming and stuff. So he had to learn to be an entrepreneur to fund so he can do science on these topics he thought it was interesting. So he tried to,
by the way, what is his research in?
well, he researched patterns of animals, how they are building these internal maps and how they are moving in nature. So that can be used for many things, I believe, and that's just been one of his deep passions throughout his life. So
wow, cool. Okay. So
it's great. He's a very smart guy in that way, intellectually very high IQ type of guy. So when it comes to being an entrepreneur, I've been looking for ways to do that, to start something, and I started a music school in Norway. And when I moved to Barcelona, I just took my music school online, and then I started an online school. And then I just found all kinds of different ways, doing a little bit here and there, and just learning a lot about that. And then later on, I just started teaching language too. So I did that. And so basically I've been, making pretty good money working part-time, teaching small groups, both online and offline. And that I had a lot of time to take degrees, to work with other things, to take risks, to challenge myself, to go to many conferences. Only with my guitar playing, I think I went to Chicago five times in a row just to learn to be better guitar player and music teacher. So that has been an amazing privilege that God have allowed me to explore so much, just because that freedom as an entrepreneur gave me. And so that is something also I hope to help others with, just to get more freedom, to take more risk, so we can really find solutions to many of those things that where people are stuck.
Yeah, you mentioned that you're an action person, that you enjoy conversations, but you're more of an action person, and that part of the reason that you started your YouTube channel was to come up with a plan about how to attack this meaning problem that so many people are having. So you've come up with two projects that you're working on. So I wonder if maybe you want to talk about those a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'm a practical guy, and I like to, whenever I'm learning something, is like, yeah, but how can I use this? If there's something I can see an application for, I get very easily, if I can't connect it to a vision. So I'm trying to paint a couple of visions for people so they can move in that direction. That's one of the first questions I ask. If I meet somebody, I say, like, how are you? What's your vision? I just want to know if our visions align, because I want to make things that outlives me, and I want to make legacies and help other people do the same. So one of these visions is the arts centers. And the idea there is to help people to understand that beauty really matters, and that artists really matters in society, not just to spread the political propaganda and all of these things, but it has an amazing value for the church, and also for society, especially to bring back that wonder and to bring people more into presence. I would say that if you want to live a spiritual life, to live presently and to be aware that God is here, that is the spiritual ABC. So whatever you're going to do in ministry, or reading the word, or prayer, or whatever, enjoying nature, having self-control when you get angry, whatever it is, if you can be aware that God is here, and you're talking with God, and you do things with God, you're going through your life with God, that must be the ABC. And I think, without becoming a mystic about it, I think that artists are one of the greatest assets for actually solving one of the biggest enemies of learning and appreciation of the deeper arts and spirituality, which is the small attention spans many people have today. So that might be one of the big enemies of finding meaning and purpose, is that, if you can't think longer than 15 seconds, or whenever it's get a deep conversation, your minds want to go to something else, you never really get to the bottom of things, do you? So that's why I think we should encourage more artists to be developed, and giving them platforms. So that will be the art center. But we also have a summit. We had that a couple of weeks ago.
So let's explore the art center a little bit. What do you, when you say art center, what specifically kind of thing are you talking about?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I write it like art centre, like the more broad term of being a place which encourages the art, which teaches the arts, which have galleries of art. And we're going to start very small, but we're also going to include a cinema. So why do we include a cinema? It's because more and more people now are starting to create alternative media, just because, we can put on Netflix movies here, and it's like every other movie, there's all of these subliminal messages of wokeness and, different radical messages here and there, very sneaky, and it gets to me. And I think many people don't even notice it, but it changes you. So you see, you have all these new streaming platforms because people want more beautiful media. People want more beautiful movies. Doesn't mean it have to be all pretty and roses and butterflies, but it means that a movie which doesn't leave you in the darkness, which so many modern tragedies can do. So it will be developing a chain of cinemas, and it will also be developing a space, almost like a co-working space, where artists and musicians can teach, and there can be discussions after the movies. There can be roundtables, just like this, for example, where we can talk about faith, and it's a place where really we can meet, just like this estuary method, for example. You could have conversations like that. I know faith-driven entrepreneurs, they have 10-week free, type of facilitating classes that teach you how to be a Christian in the workplace and how to not worship work. And so there's so many ways we can combine this. And this is not me coming out of something completely new. Most new independent cinemas make their space a multifunctional space. So it's kind of like a independent cinema that also then will have beautiful art and a space for discussions. And we're hoping to make this pop up many places in Europe and in the United States.
There's a place fairly near where I live that is a mansion that had been owned by some rich person back in the early 19th century. We have quite a few of those in California that have been, when the people die, either they leave it to the state, or maybe they didn't have any heirs, and so the state ends up with it because of taxes or whatever. And they've done various things with these. Some of them are taken over by a women's group to turn it into beautiful gardens, and they do stuff in there. This particular one, I don't know if it's the state that runs it or who runs it. It's called Montalvo. And at Montalvo, they use the property as a place to, somehow they've gotten the funding to invite artists to come and do a residency at the place. And during their residency, they can live in one of the cottages. They can just spend their time working on their art, and then their art is exhibited in the mansion. And they open the grounds so people can come and picnic on the grounds, and then they have concerts behind the place. But it made me think that, Europe probably has a lot of beautiful, old, rundown, beautiful architecture that's not being used for things that might be something where they could be picked up for just taxes. And I don't know if that's even a possibility, but it makes such a difference to look at art in a beautiful environment like that rather than in a storefront.
Absolutely. And this word that keeps popping up here, Karen, that is holistic experiences. And that's one of the other themes of this art center, is to combine music with visual art. So, for example, I'm a composer, and the way that I will share the first album that I'm working on with now with a producer in Serbia is we'll for the 10 songs, we'll choose 10 pieces of art. So you will have an audio tour, and then you come to the piece of art, and then you can listen to part of that song, and there will be maybe some speech, and you can then take a 20 minutes, and then you'll explore a little teaser of each song, and then that will also be connected. So the visual artist and the musician can then come together and then more or less synchronize their work toward a certain message. And then if people want to listen to the whole album, they can then go into the cinema right next door, and they can have like a contemplative experience. It will not be an MTV music video where the attention shifts every 7 seconds. It will be more like a slow virtual museum tour, but you will have the full pieces of music. You will have the art pieces zoomed in on, and you can be there, kind of just experience that in a full sense. So that's one way of of bringing in more senses and make it more holistically. And of course, the whole cinema hall will be like a classic, beautiful. It's on, some of these mansions have their home cinemas, right? You can imagine something like that. So I really believe that as artists, we need to come together and make more holistic experiences like that, and that will captivate even those with a very hard heart for beauty.
So you're not looking at this as a like a replacement for the church, but you're looking at it as kind of like a funnel.
That is an excellent question, and that is something I've been wrestling with for many months. Is would this be kind of a bridge so that the church can have more integrity, so it doesn't have to contextualize so much, that it kind of, in a lack of a better word, have to dumb down a little bit or go down to milk or cream, when really many there needs to eat meat, and maybe holds back many of those who could have become leaders because it becomes so seeker friendly. Maybe better to make relationships where people are, and then when they have reached some maturity, they can come there as a challenge. So yeah, I see it as a way of where you can form community, and of course, if you see the fresh expression movement in the UK, of how the Anglican Church was able to both keep their traditional institution, but at the same time create churches for specific networks and all of that were interest, and were able to really go down to I would say, a New Testament model of, it's almost like the house church, the groups, and they argue that if this is done properly, this can be a church in itself. That can be church. Where I am in my thinking right now, I haven't gone that far, but definitely this can be a space where there can be worship, there can be a contemplative prayer, there can be prayer together, it can be preaching of the word. These things can happen there, I think this is a beautiful place for people who appreciate beauty, where we can explore the impact of that together with worship. But there's one more reason why I'm so passionate about this, Karen, is that since I come from listening to more simple music to more complex music, like you talked about, then sometimes when I hear some of the modern worship music, I'm thinking, is this really the best we can do? Is this the best we got?
Boy, I'm on your side on that.
And I gotta say, I believe, just like Joel Pelsu from Arts and Entertainment Ministries in LA, he said, God can redeem people, but he can also redeem music styles. So I don't say this music style comes from this place, so it's unredeemable. This music style cannot get a second chance. So I believe, I make crossover music. I combine classical with gospel, or I have now a wonderful African-American producer that we're going to look at, how we can combine like really rich classical music with some of these hip hop, because it's a great way to share truth. And of course, mostly I myself listen to just pure Bach, but for me, going there was I needed a bridge. So also in music, I think we can build bridges and be more missional about it to get out of this classical. It's kind of like this elitist thing and as a bubble, trying to get more into the world with that type of a beauty. And just want to mention one more thing there, Karen. You said, maybe we can try to find these old buildings and renovate them and preserve them. And I think that's a very, very important work. But what we're trying to do here is it's a bit different. Just like becoming a Christian is not improving yourself, is to fundamentally being renewed. So really what we're aiming for is to find something modernistic and very ugly, and then make this into a beautiful place. So we want to find a place where nobody wants to be, which is dry, which was made out of ideology and not out of cost, which keeps you unconscious when you look at it because it makes you stressful. So you don't want to be present there. So I think it's a very smart way of not making people present of God, and we want to make that beautiful. So even it has a contrast if we can. So that's the strategy, both with the music, with the art centers and also with what we call the Church Square Renewal Center, which is the long-term goal, is to actually have a synergy of businesses, take a very ugly, modernistic, failed type of area in a city and make a beautiful square and have these different, cinema and art center and church and restaurants coming together all in beautiful style and make a place where we can be community-centric and show really how the life of the church can come together with that community and really contribute to it. I think if the church loses its contribution to beauty, there's many people who could have respected the church a lot, which really loses that connection. And that is a big problem.
That's such a terrific idea, to go into the Soviet era block buildings and turn them into something beautiful, That's an extraordinary idea. But all of this, of course, costs money. So how on earth are you going about funding this kind of a thing?
That is the problem that people haven't solved. And I've been praying and thinking and discussing about this a long time to crack exactly that problem, Karen. And I think I found a solution. So put on your seatbelts here. This is ambitious, but it is also rational, I would say. So I know that one of the main problems with churches right now is that they are not able to plant them into the places that needs them the most, which is in the urban areas, right? Because it just costs too much and people cannot really, can't really defend that type of investment in many cases. So what can we do? Well, I've been looking at posters, commercials around Europe, especially around Europe. But I think a lot of that can be applied to United States too. What is the place which each city really says, this is our city. This is the place we're most proud of. This is the place all the tourists comes to. This is the place where people want to spend the most time and where you can have the highest rent for all the businesses. Almost always, it's that beautiful old church square. Just be aware of it. You will see it's all over the place. In South America, also, whenever they make a commercial for a place, you will always see the church square somewhere in that picture. So if faith-driven entrepreneurs can come together, people who are not only looking for a return of investment financially, but also return of investment socially and spiritually, can come together and then develop a synergy of these businesses and say, you know what, if we actually don't build as high and as tight as possible, but we actually give some room here, and the church will only highlight the chance for this place being sustained over a long period of time. It's harder to kind of make it into the Soviet corner if it's a church there and all of that. So just to make it sustainable, make it a place where you can grow a community over a long period of time, it makes sense that you can include a church there. So what will happen then, Karen, is that these businesses can then pay for the real estate of the church, so that the church doesn't have to pay more rent to be in a really great, inspiring central location, because they are bringing a lot of foot traffic to the businesses. And I through the presentations I'm making now for investors, I am convinced that it will easily pay for itself for the investors. It will be sustainable to being able to give a very low rent for the church to be there, by them, but all the traffic and all the community that will be created. So we hope to make these church squares, which is bigger urban city developments projects. So I believe that can work, but we need to reduce risk, and that's why we start with the small art centers, where we have a little restaurant, maybe, with little bit snacks. We're learning to build restaurants. We're learning to build cinema. We're learning to build music school. We're learning to maybe sell antiques, things like that. And then this can then, with proof of concept, be building pieces in the bigger urban developments over time.
Well, we certainly have an example of that here in the Bay Area. You said you spent some time in San Francisco, so you know where San Jose is, which is south of San Francisco, and I live kind of halfway in between. And there have been a lot of big developments done over the last 30 years that I've lived here. And one of the developments that they put up, and I think it was maybe 20 years ago, is a place called Santana Row. And Santana Row is beautiful architecture. It's mainly condos and apartment buildings, but then on the main floor they have businesses. But they made space for a central plaza in the middle of this whole area, and the central plaza is just beautiful. And they even planted a little, it looks like a beautiful old medieval chapel, but they use it as a wine bar. I mean, it's a brand new building that they put in there, but it's just beautiful. And the whole place just has this atmosphere, and it's thriving. It's constantly filled with people. Since then, there have been 4 or 5 other developments equally as big as that, which are just rows and rows and rows and rows of apartment complexes. And they have some storefronts, but mainly the main level is parking structures. And you have to, so it's just all these big parking bays with a few stores in between. They're so ugly and hopeless. And I keep thinking, how could these developers have looked at Santana Row and seen the thriving, beautiful community that's developed there and still go and take their money and build this other thing? I mean, it's really startling that this kind of thing can happen. And then about 10 years ago, somebody finally got smart and built another. It's more modern than Santana Row. The architecture is more modern, but at least they built it around a square. And that place is just packed all the time. It's just apartments, but on the main floor of the apartments, there's room to rent out to lots of different food kiosks and coffee shops and that kind of thing. And then they have the square. And if you have a square, then once a week you can bring in some live music, and that gathers community. And but those are the only 2 places in this whole area, and all of the rest of them are just these nonsensical big box buildings. So I think there are entrepreneurs who, if they could see what kind of success can come out of being smart about these things, you know, that there would be some investment available for that. So that's a pretty cool idea.
I'm really glad that you like it. And I think the reason for many of these very dehumanizing areas, it's ideology. It's not really functionalism. They have taken a lot of these concepts as functionalism, and they have a different dictionary. And because they believe that truth is relative, they can find up all kinds of stories around there. So people go around looking with their ears, right? They're looking and they feel, you know, but then they hear the story, and so they're really reacting to a story instead of really dealing with reality. And in Scandinavia, statistics shows that about 75% of the population in modern Scandinavia, in Norway, prefer classical architecture, and about, you know, probably more 90 or 95% of everything new that's built is just these profit boxes that you don't know if it's the workers box, you know, temporary boxes, or if it's actually a house they're going to build there. And there's a big uprising now called the architectural uprising, which is gaining there in media all over the place now in Europe. And there's over 1 million now, probably, all the groups that I've seen. There's keep popping up new ones from all kinds of countries. Even down in Syria, they're having architectural pricing now, because they are destroying cultural heritage with this modernist ideology, which want to break with tradition. But the good news is that it cannot be sustained, and I think it's cracking in so many areas of society right now. And now it's a time that we become more strategic about what will be the next. I think it's the same thing with Christian worship music. It's people are now looking for more older liturgies. There is a big movement for, you know, in the conservative direction for truth and reformation and many of these things, because people kind of, this type of modern evangelicalism has become a bit superficial. Many of the young people are looking for something deeper. So that is why I say I hope to help more composers to be more creative. So instead of the music commercial music industry deciding what type of, you know, music that will be very popular and used, why don't the talented, genuine Christians that have studied some theology helped more in small communities to develop new arrangements, new compositions? It doesn't make any sense. I come from a church which has the old beautiful hymns, and I love that. I just love those. But it doesn't make sense that the Holy Spirit is inspiring new beautiful music right here today. That's part of the worship. So when you're not using the creative talent in the churches, you're basically removing a great opportunity for many of those creatives, which otherwise maybe feel a bit frustrated with all the more intellectual type of side of spirituality, and you're not giving them opportunity to start loving God, because usually we love people that we do things for more than those who do something for us. So we got to get people in action. And I really believe that if we can work side by side with believers and non-believers, that's just a great way to start loving more God also.
Well, I'll send you some information about a couple of musicians that I know that are working on this kind of thing. One of them that comes to mind right now is Dirt Poor Robins. Neil deGrasse and his wife are a group called Dirt Poor Robins, which is an interesting name, right? But yeah, they just released a new album yesterday, and extraordinary. They use a lot of visual art along with the music, and it's very very contemporary, but very beautiful and interesting and deep. So there are people out there doing that. So what kind of response have you had from these investors that you've talked to?
Right now, we're going to start a crowdfunding campaign in 2 weeks. And the thing about investors is that you need to show that you already have some support. So I've been talking with a Christian investment company in the United States, which has a network all over the world. And he has said, you know, Magnus, if you give me a 10-slide pitch deck, I will help you to look good. But before that happens, and also before you can get on the marketplace of faith-driven investor, to be allowed to have your investment case there, you need to show that you already have a little bit support from people around you, just to kind of have a, you know, a little bit of a needle eye you have to go through there. So we're going to have a month of crowdfunding. We already had a big, you know, a summit for Ideal Classical Teaching Summit. We had giveaway. Now we're going to have crowdfunding. We're going to have a new summit for classical musicians. And all of this is then bringing awareness around this project. And then when we do have more support, we can then go to the investors, which will be a process we will do later this year. And then I hope we can find a good team. We can work over time, and that this can be an opportunity also to make more tent makers, just like Paul in the Bible, that was supporting their own ministry. And I think also there are big changes happening also in the funding of ministers that is happening, and we need to think about sustainable models there as well. And I really believe that what the faith-driven entrepreneurs are suggesting is a great way to where we can get a lot more closer for the goals we need for evangelizing, you know, all the nations of the world. So I live in a very, very exciting time these days. It's only self-control that contains my excitement right now. Well,
can you tell me more? Can you tell me more about the Classical Music Summit that you said you have coming up?
That's right. That's right. So this will be together with I'm speaking now with a wonderful classical composer, conductor, and tenor and teacher in Vienna. Called Alexander Bleschinger. And he has, for 20-30 years, done a project called Harmonia Classica, which is a contest only for new, beautiful music. And he has really been battling a lot of the ugly music. And he says that things are changing. He says now it's harder to sell concert tickets for the ugly music. And it's a renewed interest in beauty there. So he's hopeful. So what we want to do, we want to create a new classical, like a composer school, really to bring, again, here, building bridges, bringing believers and non-believers together, coming together for beauty, to create new, beautiful music. You know, it's great to play Bach, all of that, but we want to create new, beautiful music. And that's just part of the contest he already been doing. But we want to then help more systematically create community, give people feedback, and all of the things that I've been lacking as a composer, you know, for the last 7 or 8 years after I came to Christ and I started listening to music in my mind, just that come very quickly after I was born again. And I think I have stewardship over that. But I've been very frustrated because in one way, you're a bit rejected by the church. They don't know what to do with you and your creativity. And then you go out to the world, and then, you know, you're classical, you're irrelevant, or you're even, you know, whatever you names you can get, and you can feel very alone as somebody who is want to create something new and beautiful. So we want to make a community, and I don't want to give you the exact date right now when we will have the next summit. That will specifically be for composers and teachers and classical musicians to support a classical revival within music, but I'll keep you posted, so you can look out for that, but it will be on the page togetherforbeauty.com, so that we have a series of different initiatives there. And that is also a marketplace initiative. That's the full name, is Together for Beauty Marketplace. And Karen, why do I call it that? Because a lot of these movements happening now saying politicians allow these modernist buildings, the modernist painters, blah, 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 doing this and that. But really, who's to blame? It is the consumer. It's the consumer that buys this ugly stuff. It's the consumer that doesn't live by principle. It's the consumer that's a hypocrite. So really, it's great to use these strategic methods that's happening now. You know, it's really actually affecting elections in Scandinavia now, who wants to build what type of architecture. But we need to really be looking inside. So we want to make an initiative called Boycott Modernism Day. And this is not to become a fanatic about it, but it just means that for every for every one modernist place you go to, or for every modernist thing you criticize, then cheer on 2 beautiful pieces or arts or places. Or for every one modernist hotel you go to save a little buck, just use a little bit more and have a beautiful experience at some of these authentic hotels. And you might maybe find that if your family time will be more rich, you will have more peace if you actually can start to appreciate beauty more. So we are developing an app. We already have a Facebook group, Together for Beauty Marketplace, but we're going to develop an app that will help to bridge together the artists and the musicians to do more initiatives. Because one of the ways to overcome the temptations, like you said in the beginning, for modern artists to kind of sell their souls to the devil and just, I want to get my big break in the gallery, so I'm going to check all these boxes and I'm going to do all this ugly and provoking stuff. If instead, for example, artists can get commissioned directly by architecture firms, because that's the big mother of change here, is if we can change architecture, this will also commission a lot of work for classical craftspeople, classical artists. There will be a renewed interest for classical music with the openings and in that neighborhood. So that's why everybody should really be fighting for a more humanizing architecture, because that can really explode the revival that we're already seeing.
That's terrific. Yeah, I really like that. Is there any last thing that you'd like to talk about?
I would like to say that there's a second chance for everybody. There is nobody who is not welcome when it comes to God. And if God for you is somebody that you can't relate to, or that's something that you can't understand the faith that people have, I would consider spending more time presently with beauty, and just understand that the beauty is not contained in the objects. It only comes through them. And this was something C.S. Lewis has pointed out, but this will point your attention to something very big. And I heard some modernist artist actually says that feeling that beauty gives is unbearable, and that's why they try to avoid it. So I would say, if you really felt that your heart haven't been able to, you haven't really broken through, you're in a point in love, you're stuck spiritually, that spend some time in museums or classical music, or just can be nature, and try to really be present, and see how that might lead you toward a deeper reality, if you're a more vital spiritual life, or how that will actually to start to really transform and convict you in ways that you didn't even thought was possible. I would never think, if nobody, I don't think one person in the world would believe that I would ever become a Christian, or that I would ever become somebody who would be like a facilitator of classical beauty. You know, I was a Ramones haircut or that, or long hair and tight jeans and smoking cigarettes or joints and just, you know, laying on the floor in my own puke. I was that kind of a guy. So if it is hope for me, and my life is so much more filled with joy now, then it's hope for everybody. So I hope that's really the message I want to end with.
This has been an absolute delight, Magnus, and I just thank you so much that you're willing to join us. I'm really excited about your project, and I hope you keep us updated, and maybe you can come back in 6 months and tell us how things are going.
That will be a pleasure. It's been a great privilege, Karen. Like I have mentioned to you, I think that you are a great, what I call a gap filler, that you really see a very important need in the society we're living in right now. And these type of discussions is part of that puzzle. And I hope also to be a part of that puzzle, and that more people can help to find a holistic strategy and come together. So I'm looking forward to update you again. And also, please reach out if anybody wants to discuss with me on, you know, just send a message on Beauty and the Faith on Instagram, or contact beautyandthefaith.com and have a discussion with me if it's about faith, or you're an entrepreneur, investor, or artist, or whatever. If I'm wrong, let me know. If I'm right, let me know. And I'm just really looking forward to make relationships.
That sounds terrific. Thank you so much. And you have a wonderful day. I guess it's nighttime for you. So
yeah, it's about
have a
6 o'clock
wonderful
here in
evening.
Spain now. Yeah, 6 o'clock in Spain now. Yeah.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.